Good morning, dearest friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our journey through the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Today is Thursday, April 28th, Chav Zayin Nisan, 27th of Nisan, I think. And we are presently studying Masechet Shabbos, chapter 15, Ve'iluk Sharim. We'll find out sometime today if yesterday was false advertising when I said we'd make a siyum. We did take a little detour into the discussion about aliyahs. I hope you don't mind. I thought it was interesting. And of course, Arucha Mieretz Mida, we could spend a lot of time on that matter, but I think we should resume our discussion of the Talmud. And today we're going to be talking about preparing from Yontif to Shabbos, Yom Kippur to Shabbos, Shabbos to Yom Kippur. A little more halachic in our last 2 days. Very Talmudic. I'm not saying that you should be scared off. I'm just saying it has a little bit more of the, the halacha and the shakla v'tarya kind of format. So I want to share the screen. And before we get into the new Gemara, I want to show you something interesting. I think interesting. So in the close of yesterday's session of Talmud, after talking all about aliyahs and the like, we told an interesting story about about the colors of a garment worn by bath attendants, according to Rabbi Steinsaltz. And we determined that the clothing could be neither white nor black based on a teaching. That was it Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai instructed his children. He doesn't want to be buried in white clothing, black clothing. He wants to be buried in clothing that is Ol Yorim, Medina Sayyam, which we described are what Bainoyim are. And so the Gemara concludes that there's two types of al yorim. There's underclothes and overclothing. And obviously one of them is white and one of them is red. And so for the purposes of his comments about burial, it was a colored garment. But for the purposes of our Gemara, we are describing a white garment where stains are of grave concern. I asked the question that if I hadn't asked, you would have asked, which is, to the best of our knowledge, Olam Haba, or at the very least, shall we say, after a person's departure from this world, their experience is not constrained, confined, nor defined by matters of the material world, including colors and clothing. And so we struggle to understand why he's so mindful and so concerned about the color of his clothing. It would be a social faux pas. It would be a real shanda if everyone's dressed in spring tones and he's still wearing his winter clothing or whatever. Who cares? Since when do we care up there? And so that's an interesting and good question. And I want to always point out that we should most likely consider this as more of an allegory, more a way to convey to his kids that a person shouldn't be cocky. They should be humble and uncertain about their final, journey. And that, if we're going to be honest, is most likely the truest interpretation, that it was more of a musar to his children, that you don't know where we're going to be and we should hedge our bets and we should be constantly conscious of our zichuyot and constantly be on the ball. And similar to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who said on his deathbed, and we studied this together earlier on in our journey in the Gemara, he said, Eino yodea be'ez derech molichinoti, I have no clue if I'm going to Gan Eden or Gehenim. So I think we can reasonably infer that is the pshat over here.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So when I hear the word garments, I think of clothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think of burial, not Orthodox Jewish burial, plus going a little more to the right, perhaps. I don't think of the typical, quote, Christian burial where they put you and makeup and everything, or even some reform and conservative burials that I've been at with open caskets. I think of tachrichim. I don't think of garments. I think of the body is wrapped, and it seems to be in line with the Talmud Chacham, with tznius, with don't pachka over what color or what kind or what to do. So I'm surprised at this whole sugya, this
I want to wrap your comments into our question. Right. And what you've done is you've helped magnify the question that in general, the more emphasis you place on the spirit, the more value you place on the neshama, and the more awareness we have of the eternity of the neshama and its journey, which doesn't stop at passing. On the contrary, it continues. And so the doctor is saying, why are we at all, or very much at all, concerned about the appearance? And so that serves to magnify our question about what is going on over here, especially for the neshama. We're saying color is not important. Now, I will tell you that at the point of the Gemara, it's possible that there were varying shitot in precisely the burial clothing and garments, because at one point the Gemara describes, and I don't recall now if it's a Gemara we learned, if it was a different Gemara. There's a Gemara that describes that there was an evolution. Once upon a time, there was maybe a little more latitude, and then it became a class thing, and those who were impoverished were shamed, and so they created a uniform dress code. Pardon me for saying that, uniform way that a person is prepared for burial, simple clothes, and that tradition continues to this day, and it embodies the humility that the what we might call the quote unquote orthodox, but the traditional mode of burial. And it's as soon as we've accounted for the dignity of the family, there's no need to go crazy about the better. In other words, from a traditional standpoint, we would rather spend money to pay some Talmidei Chachamim to study Mishnayos, or to place a plaque on a classroom, or do something that would have eternal value for a neshama, than to spend money getting all the crazy. And unfortunately, a lot of the profitability in the funeral industry are on the markups and on the upsells. And
caskets,
and this kind of wood and that kind of wood. And, unfortunately, I've had situations where a family's spending $25,000 on all the different upgrades, but they can't have it. There's no budget for, unfortunately, the ritual things. It's not a criticism. They weren't, if someone doesn't know what Judaism prioritizes, you can't hold it against them. But the point is, yes, Yiddishkeit, and certainly the Shita that has become the mainstream across the board Shita in Kever Yisrael is simplicity and white.
Rabbi.
And white garments.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Hold on, just one second. But I believe, and I may be wrong, this is just something I'm pulling out of my hat or my head. I believe it's possible that this Gemara happened at a time where it wasn't yet entirely uniform, and so there were different Shitot. And so in a sense, for Rabbi Yanai to be buried in a neutral color, that was his expression of humility. Mm-hmm. It's him saying, I don't know where I'm going. That's a beautiful expression of humility. Now that there's a standard practice, so we'll defer to the practice, but it's the same sentiment, just a different way of conveying it. Rebero?
Rabbi, first of all, my Zeta told me, believe it or not, in his shtetl, they only had a standard coffin, and everybody from that shtetl had exactly that coffin, which makes more sense than the Mishagas we have today.
100%.
My question here is the particular colors. Rabbi Yanai mentions particular colors. Does he have some basis for mentioning those colors in particular?
The basis that I infer is that they had less options in those days. And so generally speaking, you had three shades. You had dark, white, and in middle. It doesn't seem like they had a purple and a green and a blue and a yellow. And today, Baruch Hashem, we live at a time where to manufacture colored. And again, I don't have background in the garment industry, but many Jews do. And today there's a lot of diversity. I infer from the Gemara that it was simpler times and they just had three types of fabric. That's what I infer, but that's, I believe, at least as I'm reading it, the idea behind this.
They had the Tcheles and the Archibald and all that, but I guess that was probably more for royalty than just.
On the contrary, Tcheles was exorbitant. Not everyone could afford Tcheles, but the fact that Tcheles was so special is the exception that proves the rule, and that they didn't really have access to large quantities of pigment and dye and colored clothing. As a matter of fact, just a little bit adjacent to that, purple was the color of royalty, because purple is a color that is also the result of a similar process as the extraction of tcheles. There's like another kind of snail, and the tcheles snail, the Murex trunculus, or if I'm saying it wrong, it might be the reverse. also creates purples, and it really depends on when it's exposed to the sunlight or whatever. But the point is, purple was a color of royalty, and another person couldn't wear it. But the reason why it was the color of royalty is because no one else could afford those colors.
In Kufat Bait Sheni, during the second temple, they used to place the body in a cavern and then come back a year later and do Likut Atzamot.
Yeah.
And collect the bones, then put it in an estuary and then bury it.
Possibly in the same place.
Possibly, or in a different place. But it was the burials went through a whole different changes over the years.
Yes. I don't want to go further there simply because I actually printed a while back a very, very long academic, like 200-page article. There's a lot that goes into it, but from the time of the Talmud already, with the exception of the fact that most people were buried in caves and not in the ground, and that I think had to do mostly with the land and the nature of Eretz Yisrael's. But I want to stick for now to this subject, but I'm very curious and fascinated by the broader topic. So there will come a time I'm going to try to pull up that article and have some more information.
Rabbi,
yes, doctor.
I think Menachem will appreciate this. Right now, yesterday and today, but the day before yesterday, for 2 days, our neighbor JJ Schachter is in Europe. I don't know if you're aware of that, Menachem, that he's the head of an organization that finds soldiers, American soldiers, who were buried as non-Jews, and goes there with small groups of Valabatim and gives them a proper Jewish burial. And that's happening these 2 days.
So you're saying these are people who fell in World War II, let's say?
Yes.
Yeah,
and they weren't given a Jewish.
Under a cross.
That's exactly right. And his father was well known for.
He was there, right? I think he was a chaplain during the liberation.
He was a chaplain, so Lau and a few other well-known figures in our community, in the Jewish community, were in Auschwitz when he went with the American troops to free them. So, but JJ took this over several years ago, and is running, I think, 3 countries right now in 2 days or something. It's very a very interesting concept.
And it's beautiful to think about, families to have some kind of,
Yeah, and the family gets the family. So mostly they get the families to go with them also.
Right. That's very special.
And
the reality is almost every American family, unfortunately, has a member that died in the war.
Right.
Or every other family, but if you go far enough, everyone had.
This year in the Mitzad HaChaim, the March of the Living, is the first time that they have a Muslim delegation that joined them, which is also interesting.
Beautiful. Listen, the more real peace and cooperation, the better. Halavai, it was easier to accomplish, but it's certainly a good thing. Hold on one second.
It's interesting, just to follow up on that. I was listening to this morning something from Daniel Hartman, who was talking about something, and he mentioned that his nephew, who just got out of the army, is going on the March of the Living because he missed it with his high school class, so that he feels like he missed something for Yom HaShoah. He's going on the March of the Living. What's also interesting is that I know the kids from America who spend a year in Israel, at least the girls who go there are taken on a similar trip to March of the Living. They don't call it that, but it's exactly the same itinerary and the same intention of what they do. I know my daughter was on that. Yeah.
All right, so I just want to read for you a few notes over here. First of all, as I asked, if we're talking about Olam HaNeshamis, We're talking about Gan Eden, a realm of souls. This is painful for us because this world is all we know and it's very meaningful to us. But as much as fashion is a very central part of our world and our existence, in Shemayim, fashion is not important, at least not the material fashion. And so our question that Dr. Hammer helped elaborate upon, is there a concern about fashion? So I have over here a note from, let's see who this is from. Well, the Torah mentions this, and others too, that perhaps we're talking about Tchiyas HaMesim. When a neshama goes on high, it could care less. Tchiyas HaMesim comes, and everyone who passed on will be resurrected. Well, then you're going to be buried ostensibly in the same clothing, and then you may have a social fashion, fashion mistake. So maybe that is pshat. The Ravid, who's actually linked to this Gemara over here, has a very interesting comment on the Rambam. Actually, here, I open it over here. So here is the Rambam, and I'm telling you, we're going to go to the Gemara. I know we did a long detour yesterday, so I want to make sure that today we learn some Gemara. In Hilchis Teshuvah, Perek Ches, chapter 8, the Rambam writes a lot of his take on matters of the next world, of spirituality. And he says, what is the final true good that a tzaddik is going to receive? It's in Olam Haba. What is Olam Haba? It's a world, it's a life without death, and no evil. When the Torah talks about good, long life, we're talking about a world that's forever and spiritual. This is the world to come. And when we talk to a tzaddik about their reward, it's in this realm, and this is the kind of good that they'll receive. And for a Russia, the pain would be lack of access to this world. If to fail to be privy to this world is to fail to be part of this eternal paradise, but rather their existence would come to an end. And that's when the Torah says kares, it means the person will not experience this spiritual bliss. This is the Rambam's unique shita. In a moment, anyways, so kares, the Rambam says, is lack of access to this special eternal existence that's called Olam Haba. Now this is important. Olam Haba. We just talked about Olam Haba. Can we give some descriptions? There's no body. It's exclusively souls. In an angelic type of existence. If there are no bodies, no eating or drinking, and automatically anything that is a bodily function will not exist in the world to come. And there'll be no experience akin to the experience of a body in this world. Spatial realities, standing, sitting, sleeping, misa, death, depression, joy. This is the a universe, a reality, an existence that's very entirely not of this world and not of the material. This is the Rambam Shita, and the Rambam says that the ideal moment of eternity, the ideal moment of schar is in a world that it has no body. Famously, the Ramban disagrees and says that actually the Olam Haba, there is a Olam Haba, Yemais HaMashiach is not exclusively Neshamas B'loi Gufim, but the true schar will actually be Neshamas, body and soul, in the Olam in Tchiyas HaMesim. And according to the Ramban, the truest spiritual achievement is that the schar, the kedusha, and the trueness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and the trueness of Torah mitzvahs will be manifest, and it will be compatible with Olam Haza, with bodies. Even though it's hard for us to imagine how something material can be supremely holy and supremely associated with Hashem, with kedusha, with Hakadosh Baruch Hu in his truest and greatest and unlimited form, but the reality is that would be to impose a restriction and a limitation on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem, as the truest Kol Yachol, who is not limited by limit and not limited by the definition of unlimitedness, is able to bridge all of reality and even bring Kedusha and have the truest moment to be in Olam Haza. But before we get that far, let's take a look at the Ravid, who complains famously, constantly on these words of the Rambam. Ha'olam haba ein by guf. So the author of the Ravid, Rabbi Avram, says, Divrei ha'ish hazeh ve'einai. These words to me, kroivim lemisha omer ein tchias hamesim legufais. It sounds like the Rambam is denying the existence of tchias hamesim to bodies, elul neshamis bilvad. The Chaye Roshi.
These are very strong words of the Ravid against the Ramban. Calls him Aish Hazeh.
Correct.
Aish Hazeh usually refer to Yeshu.
I'll tell you something. Here, let me read it, and then I'll tell you I'll tell you my take on this. Yes, in general, the Ravid has very sharp critique throughout the Rambam. As a matter of fact, the person that studies Rambam, before they're exposed to any other commentary, they become familiar with the Hasagas Ravid. The Chaye Roshi, a strong, by my word, this is not how the sages of the Talmud understood this. Shari Amru, he's going to give a sampling of the Gemara in Ksubis. Asidim tzadikim sheyamdu bilvu shehem. Mashiach comes, the tzadikim will arise litchia and they'll be wearing clothing. Kal v'chomer mechita. And similarly, they would command their children. We have our Gemara, where the sages told their children to be mindful about the type of clothing they wear. Shema Eska. Clearly, the Ravid, he doesn't say, here's my commentary on the Gemara, but by reading the Ravid, we understand how he understands the Gemara here, that where the concern about clothing wasn't while the person's neshama is in Gan Eden or in Shamayim, however you're going to call it. The concern was after they returned for Tchias HaMesim. And so the Ravid says, obviously, there was a cognizance, an interest, and an awareness about Tchias HaMesim, neshamas, and bodies, body and soul. Similarly, in Gemara Sanhedrin, Parak HaChelek, which talks all about different agadic takes on Mashiach, Shelo Yashuvu, Hatzadikim la'afar ela oimdim bigviyasehem. Tzadikim will not remain in the earth, but they'll arise with their bodies. V'chein amru b'mumam oimdim u'misrapim. That Tchias HaMesim, a person will return with their original body constraints and disabilities. Then they'll be healed. So there are varied excerpts of the Gemara where it is clear that Chazal believe in Tchias HaMesim, Mashiach, with a body and soul. And all of this proves and attests to the fact that Tchias HaMesim will be with bodies. Maybe our bodies will have upgrades. Maybe we'll be more healthy or more strong. Maybe we'll have a Eliyahu Navi type body. And so, when we talk about in the Gemara, tzadikim, tzadikim will sit with a crown on their head. We're not describing an allegoric experience, but a literal, material sense. So we have a very emphatic machlokes, Rambam and Ravid. And the Ravid, in his case that he's making, he links it to our Gemara. And by way of his complaint to the Rambam, we have the Ravid's pshat in our Gemara. For fun, Kesef Mishnah defends the Rambam in a way. The debate here, as robust and vigorous as it sounds, is in semantics, not in facts. Rambam calls the eternal reality after Tchiyas HaMeisim Olam Haba. And he quotes the Rambam to prove that. And the Ravid says Olam Haba is Tchiyas HaMeisim. The Ravid brings Gemaras that talk about bodies, but the Rambam knows those Gemaras, just the Rambam is talking about another dimension. And so the Kesef Mishnah here introduces to us, in order to synthesize between the Rambam and the Ravid, although not everyone sees this as a perfect synthesis, that there are three stages. There's our world. Mashiach comes, there'll be Tchiyas HaMeisim. And then after that, there'll be another phase, which is exclusively souls without bodies. And so the Kesef Mishnah says they're not debating, they're just talking about two different moments in time. And so the Kesef Mishnah says that the Ravid and the Rambam might agree in the Pshat in our Gemara. They might both agree that there's going to be a moment where a body returns neshama beguf. The Rambam just would call it something else.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I am absolutely stunned at the level they must have been to be able to even venture into this area to that detail. I'm shocked.
Well, it starts with a proficiency in Tanakh and Gemara and a deep spiritual clarity and sense of, of the esoteric world. There's a famous debate if the Rambam knew Kabbalah, knew the Zohar. You know that. The conventional idea is that the Rambam was not a student of the Zohar, but there are scholars, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, among others, who was a deep scholar of the Rambam, and he has a famous works in finding the attributed source for every detail in the Rambam, and I'm pretty sure on multiple occasions, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky would link the Zohar, the Rambam to the Zohar. So at the very least, there are varying opinions on the matter, but that might explain where they would have this deep and intricate picture of this of worlds that are beyond our imagination and beyond our comprehension. Anyways, just for the Shleimus, the Lechem Mishnah says a little differently. The Rambam and the Ravid, although generally speaking they'll agree there's Tchiyas HaMeisim and Olam Haba, the emphasis and the priority and the primary moment, there's not exact consensus. And famously, the Ramban, not to oversimplify things, would take more the position of the Ravid than the Rambam. And that is our Gemara here, a fascinating Gemara. Hold on. Chidushay Ramban. Let me see if we're going to get some explicit. Hold on. No. All right, now. So the long story short is that most likely the pshat here is that there's going to be a moment of Tchiyas HaMeisim where garments will matter and they want to be buried appropriately. But again, we're talking here about a region that probably did not have a specific minhag, and therefore he was mindful to give this message. In a place where the minhag is to bury everyone, bilvenim or levanim, white clothing, everyone should do so. In a place where the minhag was, and apparently there was such a tradition, to bury the deceased in black clothing, well, then everyone would do that. And over here, he was giving this instruction, and in my opinion, most importantly, conveying a value to his kids, not to be too confident and to always be humble and strive for improvement. This, my dear friends, is how it appears we should take this Gemara. And now, any final comments before we jump into the next one?
Wouldn't it be an insult to bury somebody in black? Isn't that sort of predicting where he's heading?
Only if society associates black with that place. Right?
That's what he
Doctor?
was worried about.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is the understanding that everybody needs a two-way ticket when they get buried? Tchias HaMesim is, when the Moshiach comes, is understood that everybody will be, quote, resurrected, unquote.
The common Talmud and Jewish Balei Machshava take is that every Jew, with rare exception, will experience Tchias HaMesim. Yes, it's one of the Ikarim is a belief in Tchias HaMesim. I don't know, where would Safaria give us the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amuna? It's print.
Yesh Lahem Chelek.
No, so, Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek L'Olam Haba. And now Dr. Hammer will get into the debate of the Rambam and the Ravid is Olam Haba.
Wait, one more question.
Yes.
How about when they buried them with expensive clothing? Wasn't that a time also?
Wasn't that a no? So what we're saying is that over time, until today, there is a consensus across all Jewish communities and halachic opinions on how a deceased is to be buried. But there was a time where there were a diversity of ways of burying. And so our Gemara seems to be talking about a time where it wasn't entirely a settled science. And so the crime would be to deviate from the societal standard. But if there is no societal standard or there is a spectrum, well then, who was it? I said it before. Rabbi Yanai. So Rabbi Yanai in his time, where apparently there was not a settled practice, well, it was then that he instructed to bury him in a way that is representative of his uncertainty about where he's going to end up, which again, to reiterate, to me is an expression of humility, even more than a statement of fact. Again, similar to the Gemara of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who told his students, and we learned this in this year, the great tzaddikim, the greater they are, the more humility they have before Hashem, and therefore express doubt and not certainty about their final arrangement. But Dr. Hammer, in response to your question, every Jew needs a two-way ticket, and with Hashem's help, we should be zocher to see that ASAP. Right, there's another question which we're not going to answer now, which is how long after the arrival of Mashiach will Tchias HaMesim happen? There's a commonly known fact that I think it's 40 years after Mashiach comes. There's different traditions and sayings about when Tchias HaMesim will occur. Ve'od chazon lamoed, with Hashem's help, we'll return to this discussion because this is not the last time the Gemara is going to talk about it, and it's certainly not the last time we'll seize an opportunity to discuss it. Here's our new Gemara in the Mishnah, which I promised you that we'll open up the Mishnah in its original citation. Hold on. I want to open it in its own. All right, we'll do it like this. On Shabbos, one can fold the kalim 4 or 5 times. That was an old discussion we discussed about what the purpose of folding was. Was it for ironing purposes? Was it for preservation purposes? And maybe that would be a nafkamina if you're allowed to fold today. That's an old conversation. Just to remind you. And one is permitted to make a bed milele Shabbos le Shabbos, from Friday night to Shabbos day, because the purpose of making such a bed would be to service Shabbos itself. Aval, but what is not permitted is loimi Shabbos lemoitze Shabbos. You're not allowed to prepare a bed on Shabbos if its use will only be after Shabbos. We're not allowed to prepare from Shabbos to Motzei Shabbos. This is all the earlier part of it. Now, Rabbi Shmuel taught a very interesting chiddush. Kaplan es hakelim, one is permitted to fold clothing, umatzin es hamitois, and making a bed, Yom HaKippurim LeShabbos, in preparation from Yom Kippur to Shabbos. You're allowed to do certain types of hachanot from Yom Kippur to Shabbos. More so, the chelvei Shabbos, the chalavim, the fats of karbonis of Shabbos, may yet be burned. Kerevim b'Yom HaKippurim are allowed to be burned on the mizbeach on Yom Kippur. Meaning, there is an interesting relationship between Shabbos and Yom Kippur that allows work to be done on Yom Kippur for Shabbos, and Shabbos dika things can be tackled on Yom Kippur. But Shabbos cannot service Yom Kippur. Again, we're going to discuss this at length in the Gemara, but I just want to have a fresh reminder of the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva
Rabbi.
disagrees. Yeah.
So for the question I'm asking, for mental reasons, you can't do your bed before you leave to go to shul?
No. Hold on. The nutshell is, in a nutshell, you can't prepare from Shabbos to after Shabbos. So if you're not going to use your bed on Shabbos, you're going to spend all Shabbat in shul. Well, then you certainly can't do something on Shabbos if all it's going to do is prepare for after Shabbos. Make sense?
Yes. I got you now.
That's what we're saying.
Thank you.
Rabbi Kiva disagrees with Rabbi Yishmael and says, no, Yom Kippur cannot have a secondary role to Shabbos, and you cannot prepare on Yom Kippur for Shabbos, and you cannot service Shabbos on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Lo shel Shabbos craving b'Yom Kippurim. You're not allowed to bring a burn chalavim that belong to Shabbos on Yom Kippur, V'lo shel Yom Kippur craving b'Shabbos. Nor can you service. You can't do Shabbos dika stuff on Yom Kippur, and you can't do Yom Kippur dika stuff on Shabbos. Each day cannot be touched and cannot have melacha from the other day. This is the Mishnah that we're about to explore. I just want to show you just for a moment. We'll see this in much more length in the Gemara. The Bar Tanur, Rabbi Avadia Bar Tanur, explains why can't you do Yom Kippur or what? Why can you do something for Yom Kippur for Shabbos? Yom Kippur liyos erev Shabbos. We're talking about a year that goes Yom Kippur and then Shabbos. Lefisha Shabbos chamer mi Yom Kippur. In a sense, Yom Kippur, Shabbos is more strict than Yom Kippur, and therefore you can prepare from Yom Kippur for Shabbos, but not vice versa. You can't do Yom Kippur things on Shabbos. It's like prepping or handling a weekday carbon on Shabbos. Let's see the Gemara for a lot more insight and information. If only our Gemara will load. Here we go. Rabbi Yishmael, Omer Ein Mekaplan. We have a machlokes, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, about Yom Kippur's, the ability to do things to prepare for Shabbos on Yom Kippur. I want to point out, as we pointed out when we studied the Mishnah, that Bizman Hazeh nowadays, you will never have Yom Kippur, then Shabbos, or Shabbos, and then Yom Kippur. It doesn't happen. There is a variety of regulations about how the calendar can work. Loi Adu Rosh. Rosh Hashanah cannot fall out on Aleph, Dalid, or Vav. It cannot fall out on a Sunday, Wednesday, or Friday. And if we'll do the basic math, it'll, in effect, limit the day that Yom Kippur can fall out in relation to Shabbos. And so these are not matters that actually can, or arrangements that can happen today, but in the time where there was Kiddush, according to Riyas HaLevana, all different scenarios were plausible and possible, and therefore they needed to be discussed in halacha. Tana Rabbanan, what is the source to permit doing Shabbos work on Yom Kippur? Particularly the source of burning stuff on the Mizbeach for Shabbos or from Shabbos on Yom Kippur. So there's a famous pasuk, Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato. Anyone recognize this verse? In Parshas Pinchas, we read on Rosh Chodesh about the offerings,
for Shabbos.
the daily offering, the Shabbat offering, the weekly Shabbat offering, and then we learn about Rosh Chodesh, etc. So this is a famous. So the verse says, "Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato." The oila, the burnt offering of Shabbos, on its Shabbos, or every Shabbos, there is such an offering. There's a brisa that reads it interestingly. Olat Shabbat, the oila, the burnt offering of Shabbos, b'Shabbato is brought on Shabbos. Limeid al Cheve Shabbos. This teaches us that the fats of Shabbos can be brought on another Shabbos. What's another Shabbos? that the fats of Shabbos, craving b'yom olat Shabbat, the fats of Shabbat, b'Shabbato, can be burnt on a following Shabbos. Now, how does that work? Because you're not allowed to maintain an offering from one Shabbos to the next, but you can have a scenario where it goes Shabbos and then Yom Kippur's on Sunday, and you could be burning olat Shabbat on another Shabbat. Rashi, Chelvei Shabbos, the evening carbon, Kravim b'motzei Shabbos, is burnt on Saturday night. V'hu Yom HaKippurim, Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatay, Mashma lemedrash v'loivav, u'mashma da'oilas Shabbos kreva b'Shabbos acheres. Rashi says it sounds like you can bring these fats, these limbs can be burnt on a different Shabbos, which teaches us you can burn from Shabbos on Yom Kippur. Shocking. Yochel. Maybe this is a reciprocal arrangement. If Yom Kippur can be the follow-up for Shabbos, maybe Shabbos can also service Yom Kippur, meaning the Tamid, the offering of Yom Kippur can be burnt on Shabbos. Yochel af shel Yom HaKippurim b'Shabbos, Talmud Leimar, b'Shabbato. It can only be on its Shabbos. Rashi, vav mi'utayu b'Shabbato v'loi b'Shabbos acheres. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel says, an interesting limud olat Shabbat b'Shabbato. You can burn the offerings of Shabbos, the oila on Yom Kippur, but not vice versa. Want to see how Rabbi Steindorf explains this? I don't get it exactly. In other words, in the nuance in the words, I'm not sure how he reads it that way. Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato, the burnt things can only be done on his Shabbos, but Shabbos cannot burn another Shabbos' stuff. So the Shabbos stuff can be burnt on another Shabbos, but Shabbos cannot be the host of another Shabbos. And that would be Yom Kippur. Anyways, that's how Rabbi Shmuel learns the verse. Rabbi Akiva disagrees and says, no way. Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato. The fact that something from Shabbos can be burnt on another Shabbos, Limade, it's teaching us something else. Al chelvei Shabbos shekreivim b'yom HaKippurim. I'm sorry, b'yom tov. It's telling you that if you have a 3-day yontif, as we call it here in the diaspora, or a 2-day yontif, as they call it in Israel. For example, this year, Shvi Shel Pesach, and then Shabbos, right? So if you have leftover unfinished work from Shabbos, I'm sorry, I mixed it up. It wouldn't work in Israel. But if you have Yontif, if you have Shabbos and then Yontif, Shabbos and then Yontif. So again, not like this year's case. So if you have Shabbos and then Yontif is on Sunday, so you'd be allowed to burn the fats that remain from the Shabbos.
We'll have that with Shavuos this year.
Right. So you could burn those fats on Yontif. That's what it means. Oilas Shabbos, the fats of Shabbos, b'Shabbatoi, on a Yontif, which could also be called Shabbos. Yochalaf b'Yom HaKippurim. So maybe you could also, burn the fats that are left over from Yom Kippur. Talmud Loimer b'Shabbatoi. No. Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato. It has to be burnt in the right time. Hang on.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
Don't we run into a problem? It's not a passive thing for that to burn. You have to prepare, you have to move, you have all kinds of activities around it.
So there are many malachis that are permitted if it's part of the essential temple service. For example, there are Shabbos karbonis that are allowed to be brought. So yeah. And our question essentially is how limited or how broad are those licenses? Are you only allowed to do Shabbos business on Shabbos? Or can you do Shabbos business on Sunday, on Yontif? Can you do Yom Kippur business on Shabbos and vice versa? The question is, how limited or expansive are these licenses to do karbonis in the Beis HaMikdash? So this is, in a nutshell, the source of our machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael uses the verse to teach that you're allowed to burn Shabbos stuff on Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Akiva says no way. Kishatim Suleiman. Based on a careful reading of the above, we can infer like this. Rabbi Yishmael, according to Rabbi Yishmael, who permits the burning of Shabbos stuff on Yom Kippur, we infer Nidarim when Nadav is craving beyond if he believes that even voluntary karbonis, which can technically be done after Yontif, may be burnt on Yontif. Again, a neder and a nidava are not part of the regulated rite of the holiday or of Shabbos. They are voluntary, and yet they can be brought on Yontif. It's obvious, according to Rabbi Yishmael, where is a verse necessary to contribute additional information? Yom Kippurim, to give a license to burn Shabbos fats on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Kiva, but according to Rabbi Kiva, Nidarim unidavis ein craving b'yontif. There is a fairly restrictive policy about carbonis brought on Yontif. Only the essential carbonis can be brought, but not the voluntary, which can be deferred till after Yontif. Being that according to Rabbi Akiva, we have quite a restrictive offering policy on Yom Kippur. Therefore, we need a pasuk to give us the chiddush when there's a waiver. It's the richkra. When is a pasuk needed? Lemishrei b'yontif, to permit certain temple carbon rituals, namely burning the remaining stuff from the Shabbos carbon on Yontif on Sunday. So again, for the fact that Rabbi Yishmael tells us the pasuk talks about Yom Kippur, we understand that there is a relaxed policy according to Rabbi Yishmael about bringing other carbonis on Yom Kippur. The fact that Rabbi Akiva needs a pasuk to teach us about Yontif teaches us that generally speaking, he's quite restrictive about what carbonis can be brought on Yontif. And this machlokes, by the way, has strong implications in many areas to this very day. Rashi, plukti v'seches beitza. This is a machlokes and beya. And also in Chagiga, I think. Rabbi Yishmael, severe le command number krevim. Rabbi Yishmael is of the opinion that you can bring voluntary carbonis on Yontif. Hilkach kivan d'nedarim v'nedavis sheyachal lahamtin. Being that carbonis that can wait and be brought after Yontif are allowed to be brought on Yontif. Certainly, timely carbonis can be brought on Yontif. Kal v'chomer, the chelvei Shabbos shenishchetu kedarkon, the fats that are meant to be brought on Shabbos, which have a ticking timer, they can only be burnt bizmanon. So, from a person's use of a pasuk, we understand what their baseline is and what their standard viewpoint of temple work on Yontif. This takes us to page 114b, the final full side of chapter 15. Now we're going to hear an interesting story. Okay, not an interesting story, but a story that gives us some insight into the journey of Rabbi Zera. Amar Rabbi Zera. Now, you may all recall Rabbi Zera is famous. We met him in Brachis. We met him not long ago in Shabbos, and we know that there was a drama about his life journey. A Babylonian Jew who at a certain point chooses to make Aliyah, to go to Israel. As you may recall, his Rebbe, who is Rabbi Hud, I believe, is not in favor of a decision to leave Bavel to go to Israel. So much so that he has to sneak out without consulting or bidding farewell to his Rebbe, but he listens into a sermon and he's heard an interesting halacha which had to do with Shabbos, water. I'm remembering exactly. So anyways, here again, we have Rabbi Zera referencing his life journey from Bavel to Israel. Amar Rabbi Zera. Ki avina beBavel, when I lived in Bavel, Rashi, ki shalamadati Torah beBavel koydem shalisi Eretz Yisrael. When I studied Torah in Bavel before I made Aliyah, Hav Amrinan, here's how I understood things. We're talking now about a different matter, a related matter on Yom Kippur and on Shabbos. As we know, in temple times, we used the shofar to give different signals to the people of Israel, to the Jewish people, to note the commencement of Shabbos, the onset of a holiday, and the sounding of the shofar was able to instruct and advise the people about ceasing to work. We had a mission in our study of Masechet Shabbos that they would sound the shofar and the people would stop, would come in from the field, and the second blast. I don't know if you recall that mission. So again, when I lived in Bavel, here's how I understood Allah. Hadetanya Yom Kippur, Shechal Yisrael Shabbos. Friday is Yom Kippur and Shabbos is Shabbos. So there is the transitional moment from Yom Kippur to Shabbos. La Yehayu Toikim. They would not sound the shofar blast. Rashi Sheish Tkiyos Shetoikim Erev Shabbos. Almost every Erev Shabbos, there were 6 tkiyos. What was the function? Lahavtil, to cause them to stop doing work. Lahavdil, and to stop doing malacha. But it was not needed on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos if it's Yom Kippur. Why? Nobody's at the job site on Yom Kippur. And so if no one's on the job site on Yom Kippur, well, there's not as much relevance about when Yom Kippur ends and Shabbos begins. And so therefore, Rav Zera said, I understood there was no need to sound the alarm, the shofar blast, to let people know that it is going to be Shabbos. Shabbos. What about if Shabbos goes into Sunday and Sunday is Yom Kippur, or Saturday night is Yom Kippur? They would not make Havdalah. Rashi, he says, I'm talking about the Ata Choinantonu, or in prayers to make a statement, a declaration of Havdalah, if it went from Shabbos to Yom Kippur. So I used to think this assertion, Divrei Hakol, he is an opinion that is across the board held by Rabbi Yoshmal and Rabbi Akiva. Everyone should agree that rituals that are to draw attention to the distinction between Shabbos and Yom Kippur and Shabbos, that are to draw people's attention to the distinction between Chol and Shabbos, or to stop doing work, is unnecessary if you're going from sanctity to sanctity, from Kedusha to Kedusha, and from no Malacha to no Malacha. That was my original Babylonian viewpoint. When I went up to Israel, I met new people and I learned new things. I met Yehuda, who's the son of Shimon ben Pazi, the Yosef Ikamar, who taught as follows. I learned something new. What did I learn? He says, Rabbi Akiva, this teaching that restricts making a shofar blast on Yom Kippur for Shabbos, or Shabbos to Yom Kippur, and restricts making Havdalah from Shabbos to Yom Kippur. This is exclusively the viewpoint of Rabbi Akiva, who generally is more restrictive about what you can do between Shabbos and Yom Kippur and Shabbos. The Rabbi Yishmael, what would Rabbi Yishmael teach? He says as follows: Kivan the Amar Chelve Shabbos Kravim Yom Kippur. Being that he holds that you can go from Shabbos to Yom Kippur and you could bring certain fats that are burnt. Litka, they should sound the shofar. Ki heiche de leheviyadi the Chelve Shabbos Kravim Yom Kippur. The sounding of the shofar would be to inform and remind the folks that you're allowed to burn the fats of Shabbos and Yom Kippur. Let's see Rashi here. Rabbi Akiva, the Chashav le Yom Kippur Shabbos. He treats Yom Kippur and Shabbos equally. There's no need to blow a blast in between the two. Lekera, to draw attention to the distinction. The shofar blast only is to bring attention to a greater degree of restriction of chumrah. Being that there is no need to remind the people to stop bringing Yom Kippur fats on Yom Kippur, because, or I'm sorry, Basically, we don't need to sound we don't need to sound the shofar to draw restriction between the 2 days. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, Kivan the Kila Yom Kippur Shabbos, being that he views Yom Kippur as lesser sanctity than Shabbos, they should sound the blast to remind everyone to stop processing Yom Kippur karbonis on Shabbos. With Kia Zu Yavinu Shu Yom Akal. And with the blast of the shofar, people will begin to understand that Shabbos, that Yom Kippur today is a lower tier, lower degree of sanctity. And when Yom Kippur would fall after Shabbos, and there is no shofar blast. So basically, according to Rabbi Shmuel, who has a different standard, a different degree of Kedusha of Yom Kippur and Shabbos, he would warrant a shofar blast. To remind the folks that they should stop doing Shabbos karbonis on Yom Kippur they should stop doing Yom Kippur stuff on Shabbos because Shabbos has a greater degree of sanctity. So Rabbi Zera says, I challenged Rabbi Yehuda and said, I told him, there is a principle in the Jewish law, which is that Kohens are meticulous and well-versed and vigilant, according to the Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation. They're on the ball. We should make a t-shirt. Kohenim are on the ball. Think we can sell? Actually, there's not too many Kohenim, so it's bad for business. Never want a niche item that there's not enough customers.
It'll be manufactured by the Levi company.
Yeah. Zrizim Haim. What is Zrizim? Rashi says, Bekianim. They are very well versed and knowledgeable. Bakom. They know the laws. They don't need a reminder. The Kohanim, if they make it to the temple, they know their stuff. Tomorrow we're going to pick up with a challenge to the search that Kohanim know their stuff. So if you have any hard feelings towards a Kohen, tomorrow might be your day. Please join us. And gentlemen, Ayasher Koyach, thank you for being on board for today's discussion. Wishing everyone a wonderful, blessed, healthy, happy day, and praying for good health, healing for all of Klal Yisrael. And we should mention, Rebel, you're on. Let me see if I can remember again. Chaim Yaakov Moshe Halevi ben Rivka, and all others who need a refuah, they should have it completely and speedily. Shkoyach, have a wonderful day.
Ernie, maybe we'll grab a coffee.
Not today. Today I'm booked.
No, I'm next week, Sunday, next week.
We have same tomorrow, not like a month.
Sorry?
Monday. I think we'll have the same tomorrow, more likely Monday.
Yeah. Either tomorrow or Monday. Good chance tomorrow, but yeah, Monday is equally a good contender for
tomorrow. Is the day. It's Erev Shabbos.
Yeah. All right, folks, I'm gonna end because Shalom is gonna do Chumash. So thank you all so much.
Okay.